So today I'm going to talk about the trickster, how to identify the trickster and how to unhook yourself from it. And the trickster, in the way that I use the word, is a force. You could call it a force of darkness. You could call it a being. You could call it a part of your own mind that seduces you and distracts you into low energy. So it's a little bit different from the ego. The ego is defined in so many different ways. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's helpful actually to think of it as a force, as a being, because then you can not defeat it, but you can let it cultivate qualities within you so that you move beyond its influence, right? And it's been pointed out to me that in several traditions, including in Kabbalah and certain kinds of Judaism, they refer to this thing called the trickster. And Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Outwitting the Devil, which is kind of exactly what I'm going to talk about. And again, right, some people don't like thinking of there being a force of darkness, but as I've studied the mind field, both in myself and in my clients, I have to say that there is quite a momentum or a seduction or a force of temptation, you can say, that leads us away from our intentions, that leads us away from living an embodied life of Christ consciousness, of understanding the perfection of life, of being love in this world, of accomplishing things that we want to accomplish, right? And that's why a lot of law of attraction teachers, especially the OGs, they talk about definiteness of purpose, because that definiteness of purpose gives you some structure, right, to follow, right, a vision, so that you don't get distracted by your doubts and your fears, right? That's how anybody that's done anything, wonderful, that's not in the normal convention of reality, they have stuck to their vision, they have stuck to their intention. So a really powerful way to become aware of how the trickster chronically operates in you is to set intentions throughout the day, even notice in meditation, what are the chronic things that pull you out of your intention? If your intention is to listen to silence, if your intention is to go into the void, if your intention is to, meditate on the energy of love, what are the chronic patterns that throw you out? For a lot of people, it's fantasy. And I've seen this in myself, and I've seen this, I have a lot of Pisces energy in my being, but I don't like to use excuses, right? I've seen that fantasy can really put me in a floaty space, right? It feels like I'm floating in a tank of water. And I used to use music as a way to kind of escape. And I don't think fantasy and imagination, I think those are actually powerful tools. But the difference is, are you being dragged unconsciously into fantasy in a sort of numbed out, like inert or, non-vivid place of like kind of fogginess? That is trickster energy. If you're using your imagination, right, to create, that's different. That feels very vivid. That feels very alive and intentional. The difference is between life and death, literally. Death feels like autopilot. Life feels like focus. So let's start at the bottom of the emotional scale. For a lot of people have a crazy, tricky trickster called guilt and shame. So that can manifest in a myriad of ways, right? Shame about who I am, about where I am in life, about what I haven't accomplished, about things I did in the past. So what's a good medicine for guilt and shame? Let's say you've done things that you're not proud of. So being stuck in sensation is unconscious female energy, right? Because remember, the unconscious female is stuck in sensation. So if I'm stuck in guilt and shame and I'm looping in guilt and shame, the medicine is healthy male to say, okay, let's give some divine reason and let's use our wisdom to bring us out of this pattern, which is that every single person that has been on the opposing end of an unconscious act of yours was also creating their reality. And this is not to excuse unconscious behavior. This is not to, give your ego permission to be an asshole, but it's just a way to like forgive and say, oh my gosh, like, yes, I can say from experience that I was in a very abusive relationship with a person, but I was abusing myself and I was embodying a victim, and therefore I was attracting abuse. I can own that, right? And so I know, and so when I've been unkind, right, part of me wants to stay guilty and shameful for that, but it's like, no, they are pulling it out of me. But so I can do two things. I can forgive myself for whatever I've done, because the alternative is to remain in a loop of guilt and shame, which is the frequency bandwidth that keeps addiction going, right? And addiction, you know, entities and dark entities and all those things, they love addiction, they feed on it. And isn't that interesting that what keeps you in that behavior is the unwillingness to forgive self? And if your mind is still projecting blame, even if you're disidentified from it, if your mind is, as a machine, is still projecting blame, you have not forgiven yourself, right? You haven't seen reality as it really is. Ask your soul, ask your higher self, like, what do I particularly need to forgive myself, perhaps for the choices that I've made, the life that I've lived, right? The ultimate seeing is like, oh my God, like actually we design our reality. And if we just realize that we designed the journey to be just a stepping place to where we're going next, right? We manifest the family and we manifest situations, and we create situations that the ego mind in its hierarchical and comparative habits define as bad or shameful, but that's just a trickster trying to get you to stay stuck, right? So how do you know you're in trickster energy? You are stuck, you're unhappy, you're not moving forward energetically, right? And so a lot of times that requires some healthy male energy of wisdom and setting intentions, right? Because it's very common for spiritual people who are really good-hearted people to remain in sacrifice and guilt and shame, because they believe on some level that that's altruistic, that is altruistic. But the belief that guilt is altruistic is, what are the fruits of that belief? Look at the fruits. The fruits are that you remain in addiction. The fruits are that you are chronically unhappy. The fruits are that you lack vital energy, right? You know a program by its fruits. So when you see that coming up in you, right, just name it and say, you know what, let me sit with this, right? If I have the tendency to feel guilty, how else can this show up? You know, it's very common that parents feel guilty about what's happened in their children's lives, right? They blame themselves. And so then they compensate and they let the kid spend all their money or whatever. And so what's the medicine? Well, the medicine is understanding your children chose you. They chose their life experience. Not one human can ever be made to blame for things that happen, because the reality is so much more complex than that. So give yourself a break and realize that keeping yourself in guilt and shame does nothing but drain your bank account, drain your energy, and drain your health. Well, that's the fruit of the trickster, right? And so to just snap out of it, make a decision and say like, oh no, I see you, trickster, trying to make me feel like I don't deserve love and I don't deserve life because of X, Y, and Z, but I do, right? And so having conviction, that's the medicine to get out of conviction and forgiveness. So how else can the trickster show up in your life? Well, it's depending on whether it's male or female energy. A common unconscious female trickster energy, it's addiction to addiction, right? It's addiction to sadness. It's addiction if you've had a horrible breakup or like something in your life, a tragedy or loss, to allow yourself to grieve, right? Allow yourself to move through the process of grief. But then after a certain amount of time, if your mind keeps recreating the suffering by seducing you, like the trickster literally feels like a seduction. It's like you're drifting back into autopilot, into fogginess. So play that song from your wedding, even though your husband was horrible to you, and you should be happy that you had the balls to leave, right? Be happy, you did it. Like you moved beyond the challenge. But then the mind wants to keep you in the past by saying, oh, but look at the life I don't have now. Look at what I don't have now. Play that song, watch a movie about the same subject that keeps me in the energy, right? What's the fruit of the behavior? It's keeping you in low energy. So to see that, right? And that can take some discipline right? To say, because for a lot of people, that sadness, right? There's a lot of glamorization of sadness, which there is a beauty in every emotion and in the human experience, but there's a point where you take that too far and you start to glamorize it. That's the trickster. Because essentially the trickster doesn't want you to believe that love is real, that you deserve love, that you deserve life, right? Vividness, aliveness, synchronicity. And so it will convince you in somatic ways to drift back into autopilot. So if you glamorize sadness, look at that a little more closely. Like, am I actually glamorizing something that's actually keeping me stuck in unconscious female energy where I am not moving forward in life? I keep slipping back into this sadness, which, right, with the healthy female energy, we accept, right? So you become aware of it, you accept it, and then you realize, you name it, and you say, like, no, trickster, like, I'm not gonna do these habits, play these songs. Maybe I'll even tune out from Instagram and social media for a while until I feel myself again, until I feel my aliveness again and my desire to move forward in life, right? Until I feel reconnected to my soul and the perfection of everything that has happened in my life. I will not give in to these seductions to stay into low energy. So righteousness is another classic trickster, right? And the reason why I think it's taught so fervently, right, this addiction to be right, is because it is really an addiction. Like, it is a cheap form of power to need to be right. And it can be a very intense thing to sit with, like, to overcome, because the fire that you feel, right, when you really want to be right, when you really want to prove a point, it can be intense. It can make you sweat. It can make your eyes blur, right? But that's the power of the trickster. But it has no power compared to you, compared to presence, compared to intelligence. So you need to reach a point where you're like, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? Right? Sometimes being assertive and creating like a firm boundary, that's not always incorrect, or that's not always like the non-spiritual thing. Sometimes it's absolutely what you need to do, right? So don't put that in the shadow. But if you have a pattern of being righteous, of pointing out other people's flaws, well, what your mind does, right, is what you do to yourself. And so if you see that about yourself, like, wow, maybe if I'm walking around talking about how everybody's wrong, what I need is more love in my life. I need to accept who I am and where I am in my life. And so if the trickster wants you to believe that love isn't real, but you give yourself the experience of love, then you've overcome the trickster, because now you've made love real, right? If the trickster wants you to believe that love isn't real, but you are love, and you give yourself the experience of love by unconditional acceptance and presence, the trickster has no power. So how else can the trickster show up in your life? Well, if you make intentions and you begin to see how you get distracted on a daily basis, a classic way that people get distracted is empathic people get distracted by the energy in the environment, right? The hypervigilance to the environment, even the astrological environment, even whatever, cosmic energies. If you are entirely, what creates suffering is identification. So if you are entirely identified with your environment, although in a higher octave, this is an aspect of unity consciousness, right? Being able to feel the whole universe as my body. But if you are always stuck in intense energies that wipe you out, right? That's a trickster energy. And to say, oh, I see you. I see you're trying to like throw me off. You're making me hyper vigilant to my environment. Maybe every time I hear somebody arguing or raising their voice, I start paying hyper attention, which may have been a strategy as a child. But as I often say, do you really want your 3-year-old to run the rest of your life, when in fact that can be quite maniacal, right? Children are maniacal until they learn, right? Until they learn their own lessons. But you don't want your inner 3-year-old telling you what to do. It is no longer an intelligent program, right? So you have to have the discipline to unhook yourself from that 3-year-old. And it's funny because when I do a certain process that I do to heal the subconscious with people. People's trickster energy can often appear as a little kid. As a little kid. A little innocent kid. You look so innocent, right? And a lot of the teaching is about like, well, everything we do is innocent because it's just something that happened in childhood. What I have seen in myself, take it or leave it, and in other people, is that it's actually deeper than that. There's actually an abuser quality that we use. We latch on to these energies to manipulate reality. And you can call that the trickster. And if you want to move beyond it, right, you have to be able to call it out by name and not choose it. You have no free will unless you can see something and not choose it, right? So if you tend to get hypervigilant to your environment, if you tend to become hypervigilant to people in your life having conflict, right? The savior archetype gets activated within you, which is one of the archetypes of the trickster, and you go into savior mode. That is your trickster making you hypervigilant to negative energy, where a healthy manifestation of being a helper would be to let people sort out their own things. And if they come to you authentically and sincerely wanting help, then you offer your help to them, right? They ask, and if you choose to, if it feels right for you, then you give assistance. But the trickster, right? The martyr and the savior are very tricky tricksters because, again, kind of like guilt, they feel altruistic. So you have to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you cannot save anybody. You can't, because it's every soul's rite of passage, birthright to save itself. And you can be a part of the story, but why would you take away, right? It's a dark energy for you to try to interfere with that process unless you are sincerely being called as a helper. But if you are in a stressful identification of needing to save someone, that is trickster energy. And you know that if you've ever dealt with addiction yourself, which I have, or anybody in your life, sometimes the harder you try to fix something, the more it kicks back. And the lesson of that is like, no, you leave it alone until there's a genuine desire born out of the person to move beyond it, because the only thing that creates in this universe is desire. So if I desire to be free, that's what's going to free me from my addiction. And I can tell you that from personal experience. So, the martyr is another example of a trickster. The martyr, sacrificing my needs and desires. And again, I've explained so many times why that is actual insanity, because if everybody is desire itself, you're calling desire by the life that you are living. Creative energy is what pure desire is. If I cut myself off from that stream just to go along with the flow of somebody else's stream, I'm literally in death. I'm no longer in life, which is my stream of intention, of desire, of expression. I'm no longer living. Now I'm just passively becoming part of somebody else's life. And if you think of driftwood, right, the difference between a tree and driftwood just floats and rots, right? But if you came here to be a human and to live, have this experience, like how crazy is it to throw it away by ignoring your needs and your wants? And if you don't know, the big picture about what you want in life, about what you want to do in life, that's okay, right? All you have to be aware of is this moment, honor this moment, right? Don't pick up the phone call if I don't want to talk. This is activating sovereignty in very mundane ways. And the trickster loses grip of you, because I'm not going to be seduced by guilt to say like, oh, I need to do things I don't want to do. And I need to make myself do things in order to have friends. I need to drink alcohol to keep no, you don't. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, right? That's insanity, right? And it's an insanity that we've all lived, right? So we have compassion for it. So another way that the trickster can show up is dissociation, right? And I know this very well as well. And I share my perspective on it for whatever it's worth, right? We have to be our own healers. We have to do whatever we need in order to heal our fragments. But what I saw inside of myself is that I literally dissociate from reality on purpose. I leave my body, and therefore my body remains on autopilot doing destructive things, which used to be things like binge eating. And what I realized, like, what is the medicine for overcoming that trickster, right? The trickster that's seducing me with the freedom of floating above reality, of transcendence, right? Which is another way spiritual teachings can literally turn into trickster energy. The medicine for that is making the decision that I'm going to feel my emotions to the best of my ability. And I've shared in other videos, take this or leave this, that the nervous system itself is equipped to feel energy. It's really your belief about yourself. It's really about your decision about wanting to be free, the belief that you can handle something. That is what messes up or aligns the nervous system to be able to handle past traumas. Because I can tell you, I was born into pretty heavy energy, right? 2 murders in my family, molestation, and there was plenty of intense energy in my environment. But I realized, like, wait a minute, if I want to be free, that means incarnating. That means taking my spirit back into my body, feeling my feelings, seeing firsthand the violence that's happening within me, and being the peace and the love that resolves that conflict. Because only my spirit can do that, right? There's a lot of seduction and temptation to keep you out of your body. Think about what social media does to you. Gets you like all blurry and like numbed out. Think about anything in your life that does that to you. That is the trickster. When you start to lose awareness, when you get foggy, when you get numb, right? You're no longer alive. You're being programmed by whatever's interacting with your body. You're no longer there. So to make the decision, like, okay, if I am in pain, I'm going to light a candle. Remember, I'm a soul, and I'm going to lie down and I'm going to feel my body. And I'm going to be intimate with myself. I am the love that heals all fragments. I am the love. That's who I really am. And to make that decision to the best of your ability, you're not going to be able to feel every single emotion today, but to try, right? To try to, if you notice your mind is still projecting blame, if your mind is still projecting dialogue, there's an energy within you that you haven't felt, right? And to decide which is healthy male, and then to open which is healthy female, to tend to myself, right? To tend to myself. That's how you overcome the trickster. The trickster wants you to believe that love isn't real. You prove it wrong. Love is real. I can be with myself when I feel whatever I'm feeling. So another way that the trickster shows up, anything in your life that clouds your discernment, which can be a spiritual teaching. Anything that clouds your discernment. A classic example of that is, you find someone really physically attractive, and so you ignore every red flag, right? You feel all these things that are off and that don't align with your values, but you ignore them, right? The trickster will tempt you, seduce you into ignoring those things, into ignoring self, which is God, right? Finding God is finding God in myself. And the trickster is going to trick you away from that. So it's like, okay, how am I tempted in my reality to lose connection with my soul? Is it because I'm selling my soul for an attractive partner? And I'm not saying you can't find an attractive partner that isn't, that is in alignment with your soul, but you look at it, look how it plays out in your life. Are you being offered business deals that feel really, off, but they're so tempting because it could solve all my problems right now, right? It could solve all my problems if I accept this money. Yet the people involved, they just don't feel right? But you do it anyway. Carolyn Mace talks about our inner prostitute. It's one of the tricksters. How do you sell your soul? How do you sell your soul? How does your discernment get clouded because you're trying to gain something in the external world that you can only gain within? If what I want is abundance, I have to find it within myself, right? Selling yourself out will always yield rotten fruit. The game of life is rigged that way so that we come back into alignment with ourselves. So start to notice, how do you sell your soul? We all do it. We all do it. I'm guilty of it. No, I'm not guilty of it. It's part of what I've done as a human being, and I forgive myself for it. And I learn the gem from it, right? So I won't let the trickster make me feel bad about myself for, selling my soul in different ways. But the way to overcome the trickster is to decide finally, I will no longer do that. I will no longer sell my soul. I won't do things I don't want to do. I won't do a job that doesn't feel good to me. I won't marry somebody for external validation or for security. You know, they might provide those things, not external validation. They might have security, but what's primary is the soul, my values, what I want in life. Is the person generous, kind, on the path of you know, listening and evolution? Like, that's what's important to me. So if that's there, like any other external things that I enjoy, I will take. But to choose something based on the external, even though if it feels on some level that I'm selling my soul, no fucking way, no way. So this is how we become aware of the trickster. The trickster, there is a force, and it is a teacher. There is a force that kind of interferes with our intentions. And read Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. It's a great dialogue about this process. And it's like, don't be afraid of the force, just get smarter than it. This is literally part of the pressure that causes us to evolve into a new species. We no longer sell our soul. We no longer avoid our feelings. We no longer project blame on reality. We no longer seek the essence of what we desire outside of ourselves. We see, right, if we see that we're still in a constant energy of dissatisfaction or blame, we see like, well, that's just part of my mind trying to give me a cheap version of power. But what's real power? Real power is realizing that I created this life, that everybody in my life is a soul, that I have the decision to be grateful for what I do have, for the amazing magic of the universe, for the elements, for the sunshine, to use my soul, right? To radiate my soul into my reality is how you overcome the trickster. But you have to be aware of how the trickster hooks you in. So just do this, set an intention or meditate and look how it starts to interfere. Do you get caught in whirlpools of emotion, in gossip? Do you get hyper concerned with people, stuff that's going on in people's lives? In other words, how do you get distracted chronically? That's the trickster. And the more trickster energy that you find and you release, the more subtle ones that you'll find, right? And so goes the process of evolution. So I hope I've illuminated a little bit about the trickster. Make it fun, right? Make your evolution fun and joyful. Like, I see you, trickster. You want me to feel like shit about myself. You want me to blame people for my reality. You want me to feel apathy and like there's no reason to live, or that everything is not alive. Well, guess what? Like, I am alive, and I can connect with my environment and the sunshine, and I can connect with my soul every single day. I can connect with my higher self. I can light a candle in the morning and remember that I'm a soul, and I can have an intention to live as my soul and to be shown all the ways that not soul is trying to interfere with that expression of my soul. And I will do my best to unhook myself from it, right? And stay focused, stay present. So I hope that I've illuminated the trickster. I hope this is helpful, and I hope you have a beautiful day.